Hi everybody. We decided that today we would make a little tour of the sanctuary for you, for those who might not be so familiar with the geography of the synagogue. I'm standing at the rear entrance here, typically the entrance in which you'd enter if you were coming to synagogue for some particular reason. And the first thing you'll notice is that there is a mezuzah as you walk in, and it's the custom for some people to actually touch the mezuzah and give it a kiss as they come in. This is to establish a certain kind of mindset that you're entering a sacred space. And entering a sacred space requires a certain amount of decorum, although we don't want to burden people unnecessarily with all kinds of rules and regulations. Basically, it means that you're on a higher level than your usual mode of consciousness, and it might be that you could conceive of yourself as coming into the throne room of a king or a queen, this being the place of God, right? And so in the presence of royalty, it says in the literature, one should conduct oneself with a certain degree of decorum. So one comes in, and people have their customary place, what's called a makom kavua, that they sit in if they're here regularly. If not, you just find a place, hopefully not the place of someone who comes regularly, because they could even ask you to move in some cases. But you find a comfortable place. I always like to hope that people will sit closer rather than further away from the bima. But whatever is comfortable for you, you find a place and sit down. And first thing you want to do is take hold of a siddur, and when I'm up on the bima, I regularly announce page numbers, so you should be able to catch on fairly quickly to where we are in the service. And of course the prayer book has its English and its Hebrew, and it's generally pretty easy to follow if you wish to follow. And actually, if you do follow, it makes the service, I think, much more interesting. So this is the prayer book. There's also what I'd like to call our user-friendly spiral siddur. This is a paperback which has a much more user-friendly format. Everything is divided into 3 columns. There's a column of Hebrew, and then on the right of the Hebrew, transliteration, and then on the left of the Hebrew, a translation. So between those 3, it's fairly easy to follow, and actually easier than our standard prayer book. Also, when it comes time for the Torah and Haftarah reading, we have these red Humashim. This is the text version of the Torah, divided up into the different parashot that are going to be read on a weekly basis, along with the associated Haftarah, the selection from the prophets that's read on a weekly basis. And on holidays there are special selections and special Haftarot. And again, this is all announced from the bima, so it's nothing that you have to concentrate on unduly, although we like you to focus on the content a little bit as we're reading in the Hebrew. So that pretty much does it for the book content of this synagogue experience. I wanted to come back a little bit now to the geography. So moving forward to the bima, the raised portion of the sanctuary, many people experience a kind of invisible barrier here. To the extent that we can, we want to break that down. You should feel comfortable to be on the bima, even though it is raised, and even though it is symbolically raised also. The bima being a symbol for Mount Sinai, actually, and to ascend the bima in a way is to ascend Mount Sinai once again. One goes to the place of revelation, the place of the Torah. And so ascending these steps, I think, is like making a kind of aliyah, a kind of going up to a higher level. And I would say in this particular sanctuary, you have a certain kind of architecture in which almost every architectural line is directed to the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark. There's very little decoration in this synagogue. Stained glass windows are all in the chapel. In the sanctuary, it's, I would say, rather understated. But we do have this primary object of focus, the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark, which is the synagogue equivalent of the Holy of Holies that existed in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. And just as the Holy of Holies contained the tablets of the commandments, so our Aron HaKodesh contains the scrolls of the Torah. You might notice that there are these ornate bronze doors that we have here. Sometimes when we shut them, they make a kind of clanging sound, so I sometimes call that the Shaarey Zedek bell. But in general, they're not supposed to ring too much. And you can see that there's all kinds of symbolism of the various holidays that we have throughout the Jewish year. I also want to draw your attention to the marble that surrounds the bronze doors. It's ornate and beautiful, and I think whoever conceived of this wanted to make it so that you could let your imagination run free. And if you look at the various patterns here, you can see that different images and different kinds of patterns emerge. My favorite one being right here. If you look carefully, you might notice that there's the face of a man there, and I like to think a bearded man, a wise man is there. And people have noticed this for decades. It's an interesting kind of coincidence that that particular pattern should be there. So, having said all that, maybe we should open up the Aron HaKodesh and take a look at the scrolls of the Torah. Here we have our curtain, our parochet, which is reminiscent of the curtain that divided off the Holy of Holies from the rest of the sanctuary in the ancient temple in Jerusalem. We open the parochet from the right side here. There's a simple little drawstring that is easy to pull, and you can see the collection of Torah scrolls that we have here in the Shaarey Zedek sanctuary. Each Torah being basically the same, containing the same 5 books of Moses, and being produced in the same way, parchment and handwritten calligraphy containing the first 5 books of the Bible. And yet each Torah being somewhat unique and individual because a different sofer, a different scribe wrote each one, and so each Torah has its stylistic individuality. You can also see that the scrolls of the Torah are decorated with different kinds of silver ornaments. In the case of this one, you can see there's an ornate crown here. These others have what are called rimonim, basically bell-like ornaments that are reminiscent of the bells that were worn by the high priest in Jerusalem. And also you can see on several of the Torah scrolls here this choshen, this breastplate, which is again reminiscent of something that the high priest used to wear in ancient times in the Holy Temple of Jerusalem. Now maybe I can draw your attention to this ornament. This is actually a practical one, which is used by the Torah reader to keep their place as they're reading from the scroll of the Torah. And maybe it would be in place for me to remove a scroll of the Torah and actually show you a bit of that. So I'm just going to move this over to my pulpit here. And in order to make room, I'm just going to move this out of the way. This is a very beautiful scroll of the Torah that was donated to us by Shelley Chachanov a couple years back. And written on very, very delicate parchment and with very beautiful calligraphy. This is like a Rolls Royce among Torah scrolls. Very, very beautiful. And you can get a sense of what the Torah script looks like. This happens to be a very fine calligraphy, and again, each Torah script is a little bit different depending on the style that the sofer used in making that scroll. You can see here there's a seam. This is not one continuous scroll of parchment, but rather sections of parchment that are sewn together. And there are several of these seams in the full extent of the scroll of the Torah. We happen to be here in, yes, the book of Leviticus. And Probably it would be good if I gave you a little sample of the Torah reading as well. Even though I haven't prepared this, I can maybe fake my way through a few words of it, just to give you a sense of what it's like to read from the Torah. And maybe I should even get my little yod out here so I can keep my place easily. Amen. V'yidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el Aharon lemor, ish mizaracha ledorotam, asher yiyeh b'hamum, lo yikrav le'akriv lechem Elohav. I think that's probably about 80% correct. It gives you a sense of the fact that we don't just read from the Torah like a book, but we chant from the Torah. Chanting involves both hemispheres of the brain, both the intellectual aspect and also the musical and creative aspect. And this is what we're aiming for in Jewish practice, is actually a whole brain Judaism. And the Torah reading embodies that practice. The Torah is a very special kind of book. You can see that it's not like an ordinary bound book, but produced and read in the way that books were produced and read thousands of years ago. The idea being to keep the original form as much as possible. Now, when the rabbis described the Torah, they said it was not just black ink on white parchment, but rather black fire on white fire. And what do they mean by that? They meant that the Torah has a kind of sacred energy about it, and that there's more going on there than just letters on a white background. Actually, what they like to say is that there is meaning that comes across from the black of the letters, and there's meaning that comes across from the white of the scroll as well. And together they make a kind of sacred energy that is transforming for those who both read and hear the reading of the Torah. This is something that you become sensitive to once you've made coming to synagogue and listening to the Torah reading a regular practice. There's another saying that the rabbis have about the Torah, and that is that it's the blueprint from which God created creation. Kind of like the architectural plan that an architect draws up before he builds a building, so God drew up a blueprint of creation before he created creation, and that blueprint being the Torah. So the implication is that all knowledge is contained in the Torah. These 5 relatively short books, which contain the narratives and the rituals of the earliest layer of Israelite history, somehow are also said to contain all the knowledge that God needed to create the universe, which is to say, all the knowledge that can possibly be known. So, a very, very special document here. A very special Aron HaKodesh, a special closet in which we keep the scrolls of the Torah. There's a special decorum around the reading of the Torah. Of course, we carry the Torah throughout the congregation on 2 occasions every service, so you have a chance to get close to it and even to kiss it if you so desire. And this is the basic geography of the synagogue. I've covered a lot of material very quickly, but hopefully this will give you an overview of what you can expect when you come to synagogue, and maybe a little bit more familiarity with the synagogue the next time you come in. Hopefully that'll be very soon, and Chazan Mas and I both look forward to seeing you in the very near future.